It had been one of those days where everything seemed slightly off, like the universe was nudging me in directions I wasn't ready to face. I had spent the afternoon buried in meetings that felt endless, clients who demanded precision, and emails that required replies before I even had time to think. By the time I left the office, my brain felt like it had been sifted through a fine mesh sieve, leaving me raw, exhausted, and desperately in need of home. I trudged up the steps of my apartment building, my heels clicking softly against the worn concrete. The evening was unusually quiet, the city lights blinking lazily in the distance, a calm that contrasted sharply with the storm in my head. I reached into my purse for my keys and froze. They weren't there. A rush of frustration and panic hit me at once. I must have left them in the office, or worse, dropped them somewhere along the way. The thought of standing outside my apartment, locked out, in my work clothes, with my hair still damp from the lunch break shower, was unbearable. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a quick rescue. Of course, Max was on a 24-hour shift. That was his life now, a life that left me constantly second-guessing the moments we shared. I loved him, of course I did. But lately, he felt distant, caught between his hero duties and whatever small fragments of personal time he could steal. I didn't want to call him, not yet. I didn't want to be a nuisance. Instead, I called Ethan. "Hey," I said when he picked up, trying to inject a casualness I didn't feel. "I'm locked out. Think you can bring that skill set of yours over? You know, Jimmy the Lock, as we joked." There was a pause, and then his calm, familiar laugh. "You're impossible, you know that?" "I know," I admitted, shoving my hands into the pockets of my coat. "But I'm desperate and you live nearby, so it's your civic duty." "I'll be there in 5, he said. "Don't do anything drastic." I hung up, taking a deep breath and trying to shake off the cold creeping up my spine. My apartment door loomed ahead, dark, silent, innocuous, and yet somehow, in that moment, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I leaned against the wall of the building and tried to collect my thoughts. Then I heard it. A giggle. Soft, airy, unmistakably feminine. The sound floated down the hallway of my apartment, lilting, familiar in its tone but utterly foreign in context. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I glanced at the door, my hand hovering over the terracotta pot I kept for emergencies, a spare key hidden underneath, a relic from moving in years ago that I had never needed. My mind screamed at me to wait for Ethan, to stay calm, to assume nothing. But instinct, something deeper than reason, pushed me forward. The sound repeated, closer this time. That's when I realized waiting was a luxury I didn't have. My curiosity, my dread, my need to know the truth before my imagination ran wild, outweighed any caution. I slid the pot aside, retrieving the small brass key, cold and heavy in my palm. The door clicked open, silent enough that even the faintest creak would have startled me. And then the quietness of the apartment pressed down on me, heavier than the chill in the night air. I stepped inside, breath held, ears straining. The faint giggle came again, this time from the direction of the master bedroom. My footsteps were silent, careful, but every nerve in my body screamed. Something wasn't right. Something I couldn't yet name, but my intuition whispered the truth in the corners of my mind. I approached the bedroom door. It was ajar just slightly, as if inviting me or warning me. I paused, my hand hovering above the doorknob. And then, just for a moment, I glimpsed him, Max. Wrapped in a towel, relaxed, laughing, utterly domestic, utterly intimate. And with him, Jenna, our neighbor, pressing his uniform shirt closed with a familiarity that froze my breath in my chest. The reflection in the mirror caught my eyes. His gaze met mine just for a second, and I felt my heart contract in a cold, precise knot. I didn't shout. I didn't confront. I simply turned, leaving the door ajar just enough to mark the truth, and stepped back into the hallway. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Ethan. I barely noticed. My world had shifted, and everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust had just fractured. The first chapter of this reckoning had begun. I leaned against the cold, rough wall of the apartment landing, my chest heaving as the reality of what I'd just witnessed sank in. Max. In my own home, with someone else. Laughing, relaxed, intimate, the very image of a life I had thought was ours alone. My stomach churned, my hands trembled, and yet, strangely, I didn't cry. Not yet. The shock was too raw for tears. It was something sharper, something colder, a precise fracture through every certainty I had built about our relationship. I glanced at the door again, half expecting him to call out, to explain, to beg me to understand, but there was only silence. The mirror reflected a fragment of the scene back to me. Max frozen for a heartbeat, the towel hanging loosely, the air heavy with unspoken familiarity between him and Jenna. I wanted to scream, to demand an answer, to shake the truth out of him, but I couldn't. I was too stunned. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket.
Ethan.
I had texted him in a panic before unlocking the door, asking him to meet me, joking about our Jimmy the Lock plan. Now his text was a lifeline. I'm outside. Everything okay? I exhaled, a shuddering, half-laughing, half-horrified exhale, and texted back. No. Come up.
Now.
Within moments, I heard the familiar sound of his footsteps, light, quick, steady, the exact kind of presence that had comforted me for years. Ethan arrived, slightly out of breath, with his usual easy grin that faltered the instant he saw my pale face and the tension in my posture. What happened? He asked, his tone calm but alert, scanning the hallway with the instincts that had made him the rock of every storm I had faced. I couldn't speak at first. Words lodged in my throat. I shook my head, leaning against him instinctively when he reached for my arm. The warmth of his hand grounded me in a way Max never had, never could. My chest loosened slightly, the first relief in hours, and perhaps days, seeping through the tension. Max with Jenna. I finally managed to choke out. In my apartment. Laughing. Intimate. I saw it, Ethan. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't ask questions. He didn't launch into a tirade or demand answers that I couldn't give. He simply held me, let me tremble against him, and whispered, "You're safe. I've got you." The simplicity of that sentence struck me harder than any confrontation ever could. You're safe. Safe from judgment, safe from the confusion, safe from the betrayal itself. In that instant, I realized something profound. I had been leaning on the wrong person for the wrong kind of comfort. Max had been absent when I needed him most, emotionally and physically. Ethan, always there in quiet, grounding ways, had been my anchor without me realizing it. I let myself cry then, quietly, head buried in his shoulder, hands clutching at his jacket as though it could absorb my heartbreak. Each sob was a release, a purging of the disappointment, the disillusionment, and the aching loneliness Max had cultivated simply by not being present. Ethan made no attempt to rush me through it. He let me unravel fully, knowing that unraveling was necessary before any repair could begin. When my tears subsided into ragged, exhausted breaths, I looked up at him. His eyes were soft, yet steady, unwavering. He smiled gently, just enough to remind me that the world wasn't entirely broken. "Come on," he said, taking my hand. "Let's get you somewhere you can breathe." We walked down the hallway together, my hand in his, a silent acknowledgement passing between us that words couldn't capture. I didn't look back at the apartment I had once considered a sanctuary. The betrayal within its walls no longer had power over me when Ethan's presence was tangible, immediate, protective. That night, lying on the couch in his apartment, wrapped in the warmth of someone who had always been steadfast, I began to understand the depth of what I had been missing. Love wasn't just about shared space or grand gestures. It was about constancy, attentiveness, and unwavering presence. And Ethan had given me all of that quietly for years. Max's betrayal had broken something, yes, but in breaking, it revealed something even more vital, a foundation I could trust, built not on promises, but on lived, demonstrated care. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the beginnings of relief, of clarity, and, slowly, of possibility. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds at Ethan's apartment, soft and unassuming, like a quiet promise that the world was still intact despite the chaos of the night before. I lay curled under the thick blanket on his couch, nursing a cup of coffee he had brewed while I slept. The aroma filled the room, familiar and grounding. Every small detail, the steam rising, the warmth of the mug in my hands, the hum of the refrigerator, felt like a fragile tether to normalcy. I hadn't spoken about Max beyond the essentials. Ethan hadn't pressed, hadn't demanded details. There was no interrogation, no probing questions that might have turned my heartbreak into an interrogation. Instead, he let the silence breathe around us, filling it with quiet gestures, a refill of my coffee, a hand brushing a loose strand of hair from my face, a soft smile that didn't carry pity, but a recognition that I mattered. I had always known Ethan was reliable, consistent, a rock in ways few people could be. But last night's events revealed to me the depths of his steadiness. I had leaned on him countless times before, sometimes for small crises, sometimes for emotional support after long workdays, but I had never acknowledged the possibility that what I had with him was more than friendship. Until Max's betrayal, I had been blind to it. For hours, we sat together in that quiet cocoon, talking about everything and nothing. We laughed over absurd stories from our past, like the time I had locked myself out of my apartment during a rainstorm, or the time Ethan had accidentally sent a professional email to the wrong client. The laughter was gentle, healing, and it reminded me of the ease that had always existed between us. Somewhere between the second cup of coffee and the soft hum of traffic outside, I realized I hadn't thought about Max once. Not the anger, not the hurt, not even the betrayal. For the first time, my focus wasn't on what I had lost, but on what I had and who had always been there for me. Ethan caught my gaze as I reached for my cup again, his eyes holding mine in a way that made the world outside the apartment fade to a blur. I saw warmth there, steady and unshakable, and something more, something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. A subtle, almost imperceptible tension, like a wire pulled taut with potential energy. I swallowed, heart thudding, realizing that the comfort I had always associated with friendship could be the foundation for something more. "You're quiet," he said, voice soft, teasing without mocking. "You're plotting, aren't you?" I smirked despite myself. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to figure out how to survive the week without thinking about yesterday. He chuckled, leaning back against the couch and letting the sunlight hit his face. "You know, there's a lot of power in just existing in the same space as someone who gets it," he said, eyes locking with mine. No pretenses, no explanations required. I felt a flutter, something electric and unspoken, and the air between us seemed to shift. It was subtle, but undeniable. A brush of hands reaching for the same blanket, a touch that lingered too long over a cup of coffee, a shared laugh that carried an intimacy far beyond friendship. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life where Ethan was more than my confidant, where his constant presence could be a source of love rather than just support. Hours passed. I lost track of time, of worries, of Max's betrayal. I only knew that sitting here, enveloped in the quiet strength of Ethan's company, felt like a small, fragile reclamation of my heart. Every detail of his attentiveness, every careful movement, every subtle glance reminded me that trust, loyalty, and emotional presence were not abstract concepts. They could exist, fully embodied in one person, one safe harbor. When evening fell and the golden light faded into the soft glow of lamps, Ethan shifted closer, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. The movement was tender, deliberate, but unassuming, an unspoken question hanging in the air. I felt a heat rise to my cheeks, a pulse quickening in my chest, and I realized that my heart, long dulled by exhaustion and betrayal, was beginning to stir again. That night, I didn't sleep alone. Wrapped in Ethan's arms, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against mine, I felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of rightness. The betrayal still existed, but it had been reframed. Pain had turned into clarity. Loss had turned into awareness. And I finally understood. The foundation for my happiness had been there all along, in the quiet, steady presence of someone who had never faltered. For the first time in months, I slept fully, deeply, and with the faint, thrilling realization that this might be only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds in Ethan's apartment, spilling across the living room floor in long, warm streaks. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the steam curl into the air, feeling a rare calm settle over me. The world outside moved in its usual frantic rhythm, but here, in this quiet cocoon with Ethan, I felt a fragile sense of control returning. Ethan moved around the apartment with his usual ease, making breakfast while I lingered at the counter, still in my pajamas, still letting the comfort of his presence anchor me. There was no pressure, no expectation, only a quiet rhythm that made my chest unclench for the first time since the previous night. Every movement he made was familiar and grounding, a subtle reminder that he had always been there, always consistent, always steady. We ate together in silence at first, the clink of cutlery and the aroma of coffee filling the small kitchen. I caught him watching me once, and his expression was soft, curious, unguarded. There was a warmth in his gaze that made my heart skip, a subtle pull that I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. It was more than friendship. It was the careful, understated attentiveness that made me feel seen in ways I hadn't realized I was starving for. "Sleep okay?" he asked finally, his voice low, casual, but threaded with concern. "Better than I expected," I admitted, smiling faintly. "You have a good effect on me." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth quirking in a teasing grin. "Careful," he said, leaning against the counter. "That sounds dangerously like credit where credit isn't due." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. The playful banter, the easy teasing, it was intimate in a way that felt different from what I had known with Max. It was effortless, grounded, and comforting. As the morning wore on, we moved seamlessly between cooking, cleaning, and talking about the week ahead. Every small interaction carried a subtle charge, a tension neither of us named, but both of us felt. A brush of hands reaching for the same spatula lingered a fraction too long. A shared laugh stretched into a gaze held a beat too long. Each moment was electric in its quiet intimacy, a delicate dance that built tension without ever demanding it. At one point, as I reached for a plate on the top shelf, Ethan's hand brushed against mine. His fingers lingered, warm and insistent. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the contact sit, felt the subtle pulse of energy between us, and realized how much I had been craving this. Someone who noticed the small things, someone who offered presence without pretense. "I didn't think I'd feel this relieved," I said softly, turning to face him fully. "Last night, it hit me how much I've been carrying on my own." He nodded, understanding threading through his expression. "You've been carrying too much for too long," he said. "It's okay to let someone else carry it with you sometimes." I felt my chest tighten at the sincerity in his voice. His words weren't just comforting. They were permission. Permission to lean, to trust, to allow someone in. And in that moment, the line between friendship and something more blurred, subtle but undeniable. Later, as we sat on the couch with our laptops open, working on separate projects yet sharing the same space, Ethan shifted closer, brushing his shoulder against mine. It was accidental, he claimed, but my heart disagreed. Every subtle touch, every shared glance, every quiet moment of closeness built a magnetic pull I could no longer ignore. When he laughed at something I said, his eyes locking with mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, I felt the first stirrings of desire, a warmth that went beyond comfort, that whispered of possibilities I had long avoided. My mind raced, but my body settled, attuned to the rhythm of proximity, the safety of his presence, the unspoken acknowledgement that this was more than friendship waiting to unfold. As the day faded into evening, I found myself sitting closer to him, our legs brushing beneath the table, our shoulders touching as we reached for the same items. The energy between us was tangible, unspoken, charged with a slow-burning intimacy neither of us had rushed, yet neither of us could deny. And for the first time since Max's betrayal, I allowed myself to imagine a life where someone's consistency, presence, and quiet affection could form the foundation for love. A life where trust wasn't fragile, where vulnerability wasn't punished, and where desire could coexist with safety. A life where Ethan wasn't just my best friend, he was my anchor, my confidant, and perhaps something far more. The evening settled into a hushed quiet, the city's distant hum filtering through Ethan's open window. I leaned back against the couch, my legs tucked beneath me, and felt the warmth of his presence beside me. We had spent the day moving between tasks, folding laundry, preparing dinner, sharing stories, but the mundane had taken on a charged intimacy I hadn't anticipated. Every small gesture, every casual touch, seemed layered with meaning I couldn't ignore. Ethan passed me a mug of tea, and our fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but I felt the electric jolt shoot straight through my chest. My breath caught, and I realized I had been craving this subtle connection all my life without fully acknowledging it. The brush of his hand was more than accidental. It was a spark that ignited something dormant inside me, something that whispered possibilities I had long buried under loyalty to Max and the routines I thought defined my love life. "Careful," he said softly, a teasing note in his voice, "or you might start thinking I'm trying to poison you with affection." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "I think I could survive a little poisoned affection," I replied, meeting his gaze. The warmth in his eyes was unmistakable, steady, and full of unspoken intent. We moved to the kitchen to finish cleaning, and the proximity between us became impossible to ignore. My elbow brushed against his side as I reached for a dish towel. Instead of pulling away, he let his hand linger near mine, subtle but deliberate. My heart raced, a mixture of exhilaration and nervous anticipation. It was the kind of closeness I had only allowed myself to imagine in fleeting fantasies, and now it was real, tangible, undeniable. Later, we collapsed onto the couch again, the soft cushions embracing us as we sank into a quiet, companionable silence. Ethan's arm shifted slightly behind me, creating a small space I instinctively leaned into. My head brushed his shoulder, tentative at first, then with more confidence as I felt his warmth. The subtle scent of him, wood, coffee, something uniquely Ethan, filled my senses and my pulse quickened. "Sadie," he murmured, his voice low, almost hesitant. I've wanted to do this for a while." Before I could respond, he leaned in, and our lips met. It was slow at first, a careful exploration, testing the boundaries of a new, fragile intimacy. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened, a silent promise, hungry yet tender, bridging the gap between years of friendship and the uncharted territory of desire. I felt a rush of emotion, relief, longing, and an overwhelming sense of rightness. Ethan pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against mine, and we breathed together, the room spinning with the gravity of this first, transformative spark. "I've been waiting for this," he whispered, his hand brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. "You didn't realize it, but I've always been here, for every small thing, for every moment you didn't even notice." Tears prickled my eyes, not of sadness, but of release. I realized that everything I had endured, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the exhaustion of unreciprocated love, had led me here, to this precise moment of clarity. Ethan had always been my anchor, my safe harbor, and now he was so much more. My desire, my partner, my future. We pulled back slightly, smiling at each other in the soft glow of the living room light. No words were needed. The kiss had spoken volumes. It had sealed an understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of trust and vulnerability, and the delicious thrill of what lay ahead. As the night deepened, we curled together on the couch, talking in whispers, laughing quietly, sharing stories, and slowly, the distance of years dissolved. The foundation of our friendship had always been strong, but now it became the bedrock for something more profound, a love forged through patience, consistency, and the quiet courage to finally take a chance. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe in a love that didn't drain or betray, but sustained, nourished, and ignited. With Ethan, I was safe, seen, and desired, all at once. And in the quiet of that apartment, wrapped in each other's warmth, I knew that this was only the beginning. The morning after our first kiss, sunlight spilled into Ethan's apartment like a gentle affirmation. I woke wrapped in his arms, feeling the quiet power of his presence surrounding me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel fractured or anxious. The betrayal by Max, the exhaustion of running on uneven emotional terrain, even the long stretches of loneliness, it all felt distant now, softened by the steady, undeniable warmth of Ethan beside me. We lingered in the small cocoon of his bedroom, savoring the slow, unhurried morning. I watched him as he stretched and yawned, the familiar lines of his face etched with a kind of peace I had rarely seen in him. My heart swelled with something I couldn't quite name: gratitude, relief, and a flicker of excitement. This intimacy was uncharted territory, yet it felt natural, as though we had been building toward it all along. Breakfast became a gentle dance of proximity and subtle touches. As I reached for the coffee, our fingers brushed again, lingering longer than necessary. I caught his gaze and saw the same silent acknowledgement I felt. There was no rush, no pressure, only a mutual recognition that we were exploring a new chapter together. Each glance, each touch, carried a quiet electricity, a tension that was both thrilling and comforting. Later, we moved to the living room with our laptops, working side by side. The closeness, once taken for granted as friendship, now pulsed with an undercurrent of desire and affection. Every subtle movement, his hand grazing mine accidentally, the tilt of his head toward me, the occasional brush of his shoulder, reminded me that this relationship was evolving. Slowly, carefully, we were navigating the delicate balance between friendship and romance. I realized, as I watched him concentrate, that I had never truly understood what emotional availability meant. Ethan had always been present, steady, reliable, but now I saw how that consistency could form the foundation for love. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations that defined it. It was the quiet, unyielding attentiveness that created trust and intimacy. And in that attention, I found the courage to be vulnerable, to let go of past hurts, and to embrace the possibility of a shared future. In the afternoon, Ethan suggested a walk. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of early spring, and the streets were surprisingly empty. We strolled side by side, our shoulders brushing occasionally, our steps unconsciously matching. Conversation flowed easily, filled with humor, observations, and small confessions that deepened our connection. At one point, I glanced at him and caught his gaze. There was a subtle, unspoken invitation in the way he looked at me, a question, a challenge, a promise. Without thinking, I reached for his hand. The warmth of his fingers entwined with mine sent a thrill through my chest. We walked in silence after that, letting the contact speak volumes that words could not. That evening, we returned to his apartment and cooked dinner together. The kitchen, once a neutral space of casual interaction, now felt intimate, alive with subtle flirtation and quiet laughter. He teased me about over-seasoning the pasta, and I responded with a playful roll of my eyes, our laughter filling the space with warmth. Each shared task, each brush of hands as we reached for utensils, was a reminder that love could be gentle, tender, and exhilarating all at once. After dinner, we settled on the couch, close but not demanding, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across our faces. Ethan leaned toward me, and I felt that same electric tension as before. He brushed a stray hair from my face, lingering just long enough for my pulse to quicken. Then, almost as if reading my thoughts, he kissed me, a slow, deliberate press of lips that spoke of trust, desire, and the deep comfort of a bond that had always existed beneath the surface. As we pulled back, our foreheads touching, I realized the profound truth of the past weeks. The foundation for my happiness had always been here. It wasn't Max or fleeting passion that I needed. It was the unwavering presence of someone who cherished me, who made me feel safe, and who could now transform that security into something deeper, more passionate, and undeniably ours. That night, wrapped in Ethan's arms, I finally allowed myself to feel whole. The betrayal and heartbreak no longer defined me. Instead, the quiet strength of love, trust, and shared history became the anchor of my future. And in that embrace, I knew this was only the beginning of a story that was finally mine to write. The weekend arrived with a quiet tension I hadn't expected. Ethan had a friend coming over to work on a freelance project, and I stayed nearby, helping in small ways while trying not to intrude. The apartment, which had become our sanctuary, now felt slightly crowded. I noticed a subtle shift in Ethan's behavior, his attention occasionally flicking toward his laptop or his phone, a faint worry line creasing his forehead. It wasn't like him to be distracted, and my chest tightened at the thought that something, anything, could threaten the fragile bond we were nurturing. As the friend worked, I moved to the small balcony to catch some fresh air, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath us. Ethan joined me quietly, leaning against the railing, his presence close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. The comfortable silence between us felt different tonight, tinged with a need for reassurance, a subtle testing of boundaries that neither of us had explicitly named. I want to make sure we're okay, I said softly, keeping my gaze on the glowing skyline. After everything, I don't want us to lose what we have. Ethan's hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a familiar ease. Sadie, we're okay, he said, voice calm but firm. Nothing is going to undo what we've built. I'm here. I've always been here. And now, I'm choosing to be here with you, fully. I leaned into him instinctively, letting the reassurance settle in. But the test wasn't over yet. Later that evening, when the friend left, Ethan received a call from Max. Just a short, polite conversation, but enough to make the air heavy. My stomach knotted. The old heartbreak flared briefly, the memory of betrayal threatening to undo the trust one had fought so hard to embrace. Ethan noticed immediately. He put his phone down and reached for my hands. Sadie, look at me, he said gently. That was nothing. Max, that's the past. I don't want to drag you back there. We're here. Together. And I'm not letting anything compromise that. I drew a deep breath, letting the weight of my fear lift slowly. It was true. I had a choice in how I let the past affect the present. Ethan's steady gaze, the warmth of his hands, and the unspoken promise of protection gave me the courage to anchor myself in the now. Later, we moved to the couch, curling together under a blanket. I could feel the subtle charge of our closeness, the brush of his fingers as he tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, the warmth of his arm around my shoulders. Every touch reinforced the reality that this relationship was built on honesty, care, and mutual respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that imperfection made it real. As the night deepened, Ethan leaned closer, his lips hovering near mine, testing, inviting. The kiss that followed was both gentle and insistent, a reaffirmation of everything we had just navigated, the fears, the lingering doubts, the unspoken questions about trust. My heart surged as I melted into him, letting the past slip away completely. I trust you, I whispered against his lips, the words carrying more weight than I realized. I trust you too, he replied, holding me tighter. That's why this us that works. In that embrace, I understood that trust wasn't a given. It was something earned, nurtured, and defended every day. And Ethan had shown me, in countless subtle ways, that he was worthy of mine. Our relationship had been tested, not by grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but by the small, quiet challenges of presence, attention, and emotional availability. And we had both passed. By the time we drifted to sleep, my head resting against his chest, I felt a deep, unshakable certainty. This bond wasn't fragile. It was resilient, forged in shared vulnerability and mutual care, and strengthened by the trials we had faced. The past could no longer dictate my heart. Ethan was my anchor, my partner, and my chosen safe harbor. And for the first time in a long while, I slept without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. The morning light spilled through the curtains, warm and soft, and for the first time in months, I woke without that familiar knot of anxiety in my chest. Ethan was already awake, sprawled across the couch with a mug of coffee in his hand and that easy, quiet smile that had become my anchor. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh bread and roasted coffee, a small ritual we'd started to savor our mornings together. I stretched, feeling the lingering warmth of his embrace from the night before. The memory of his protective, reassuring presence carried me into the day with a sense of peace I hadn't known I could feel. Slowly, deliberately, I let myself sink into the moment, cherishing the simplicity of being with someone who had always been there, who had waited patiently for me to see what was in front of me all along. Ethan glanced at me over the rim of his mug, eyebrows raised in playful curiosity. "Morning," he said softly. "Sleep well?" "I did," I replied, smiling.
For the first time in a long while.
We moved through the morning together, our steps synchronized without needing words. Cooking breakfast, tidying up the apartment, exchanging small touches, the quiet intimacy between us deepened with each passing minute. Every glance, every shared smile, felt like a promise, a reinforcement that we were building something lasting, something unbreakable. Later, we settled into the living room, coffee in hand, and I finally allowed myself to reflect on everything that had led me here. The heartbreak with Max, the betrayal I had witnessed firsthand, the exhaustion of trying to sustain a relationship where my emotional needs were consistently unmet, it all felt like a distant shadow. Each step I had taken away from that pain had led me directly to Ethan. Every small moment of support, every joke, every late-night conversation had been laying the foundation for this. Ethan reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face, and I leaned into his touch. The connection between us was no longer tentative. It was solid, steady, and deeply affirming. "Sadie," he murmured, "I've always been here. And now we get to start something new, together, fully. No hesitations. No doubts." I pressed my lips to his in a slow, deliberate kiss, hungry yet tender, a culmination of months of suppressed longing and quiet hope. It was a kiss that spoke of trust, of shared history, of mutual understanding and unspoken promises. My hands rested against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly where I was meant to be. We spent the afternoon wandering through the city streets, hand in hand, laughter spilling between us. Every glance, every brush of our fingers, was a reaffirmation of what we had built together. The world around us faded slightly, irrelevant to the profound certainty we felt in each other's presence. With Ethan, life didn't feel complicated. It felt purposeful, anchored in trust and affection, tempered by patience and nurtured by shared experience. That evening, as we returned home, I realized how completely my heart had shifted. The pain of the past had not disappeared entirely. It was still a part of me, a reminder of lessons learned and strength gained, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it had carved space for something infinitely more valuable, a love that was dependable, tender, and exhilarating all at once. Ethan pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine, and I closed my eyes, letting the comfort and warmth wash over me. "We're good," I whispered, my voice steady. "We're really good." He smiled, that quiet, confident smile that had always had the power to calm me, to make the chaos of the world feel manageable. "Yes," he replied, "we are." And in that simple affirmation, I understood the truth of my life at that moment. I had found my safe harbor, my partner, and my love. The heartbreak, the betrayals, and the endless waiting had led me here, to a love that didn't demand perfection but celebrated authenticity, presence, and unwavering commitment. Wrapped in Ethan's arms, with the city lights glittering beyond the window, I finally let myself breathe fully, without fear, without doubt, without reservation. The past had shaped me, but the present and the future belonged to us. Together, we were no longer just friends, no longer just survivors of heartbreak. We were the authors of our own story, writing a chapter of love, trust, and joy that would endure. This was the happy beginning I had been waiting for, and for the first time, I felt completely, irrevocably whole.